What if you could become more than human? Not in some distant afterlife, not as a vague metaphor, but right now, in this body, ascending through the heavens until your flesh dissolves into fire and you emerge as something divine. What if the boundary between mortal and angel was not a wall, but a ladder waiting to be climbed? Picture this. A man walks with God, just as the book of Genesis tells us. But unlike every other mortal, he does not die. Instead, he ascends. The 7 heavens open before him like nested chambers of light. Angels bow as he passes. His body begins to change. His skin erupts in flames. His eyes become burning wheels. His name is erased and rewritten. When the transformation is complete, he is no longer Enoch, the 7th from Adam. He is Metatron, the angel who sits on a throne beside God himself, bearing the name of the divine and commanding legions of celestial beings. Some call him the lesser YHWH. Others whisper that he has become what humans were always meant to be. This is not a story Christians or mainstream Jews widely tell. It comes from 2 ancient texts, Second Enoch and Third Enoch, documents that exist at the edge of orthodoxy, preserved by Slavic scribes and Hebrew mystics. They describe something that should not be possible, a human being who transcends his nature and becomes an angel. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually. Are these texts authentic echoes of an ancient mystery tradition that imagined human apotheosis? Or are they later mystical inventions reflecting the dreams of ecstatic visionaries? Did the Jews of antiquity really believe a man could become an archangel? Or is this a mystical fantasy born from centuries of esoteric speculation? And why does this story of a human becoming divine resonate so powerfully across cultures, from ancient mystery religions to modern transhumanism? Today, we're going to ascend through the heavens with Enoch, witness his transformation into Metatron, and explore one of the most radical ideas ever preserved in religious literature: that human beings might transcend their mortal limits and become something luminous, powerful, and eternal. In Second Enoch, a righteous man is taken on a journey through the celestial realms, and what he discovers challenges every assumption about the barrier between human and divine. The story begins simply enough. Enoch is lying in bed. He is 365 years old, a number that matches the days of the solar year, already hinting at cosmic significance. Suddenly, 2 enormous figures appear before him. Their faces shine like the sun. Their eyes are like burning lamps. Their wings are brighter than gold. They tell Enoch that the eternal Lord has summoned him. What follows is not a death, but an abduction into higher reality. Enoch rises through the first heaven, then the second, ascending through layers of cosmic architecture that ancient scribes could barely describe. Each heaven contains wonders: the storehouses of snow and ice, the rulers of the stars, the Garden of Eden, the Tree of Life, the place where the righteous dead await resurrection. But these are merely the outer chambers. By the time Enoch reaches the 7th heaven, he stands before the throne of God itself. And here, something unprecedented happens. God commands the archangel Michael to strip Enoch of his earthly garments and anoint him with holy oil. The text says the oil is like sweet dew, but its effect is transformative. Enoch looks at himself and discovers he has become like one of the glorious ones, like an angel. But is this the end of his transformation, or only the beginning? Second Enoch, preserved in old Slavonic manuscripts, gives us the journey. Third Enoch, a later Hebrew text, gives us the terrifying culmination. Let's pause here and ask a question that would have been heretical to many ancient readers. If Enoch can become an angel, what does that say about the nature of humanity? Are humans fundamentally different from angels? Or are we simply angels who have forgotten how to ascend? The journey Enoch takes is not unique to Jewish mysticism. In Greco-Roman mystery religions, initiates underwent symbolic deaths and rebirths, emerging as beings touched by divinity. Hermes Trismegistus, in the Hermetic corpus, describes ascending through the planetary spheres, shedding mortal qualities at each level until only pure divine intellect remains. In the Mithraic mysteries, initiates climbed a seven-runged ladder representing the 7 planets, each rung a stage of spiritual purification. Even early Christian ascent literature, texts like the Ascension of Isaiah, describe prophets rising through heavenly realms, witnessing secrets forbidden to ordinary mortals. What makes the Enochic tradition distinctive is its insistence that this ascent is not merely visionary or spiritual. Enoch's body itself is transformed. His flesh becomes fire. His transformation is ontological, not metaphorical. The 7 heavens that Enoch traverses are not abstract concepts, but architectural realities in ancient cosmology. The first heaven contains the winds and weather. The second holds the imprisoned fallen angels, the watchers who sinned by mating with human women. The third heaven is paradise itself, both the Garden of Eden and the place of future reward. Higher still are the heavens of celestial mechanics, where the sun and moon run their courses. And finally the 7th heaven, where God dwells in unapproachable light. This cosmology was not unique to the Enochic texts. It appears in various forms throughout Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. The Apostle Paul speaks of being caught up to the 3rd heaven, where he heard inexpressible things. The Testament of Levi describes a similar 7-fold ascent. The Apocalypse of Abraham shows the patriarch rising through celestial realms. What all these texts share is the conviction that heaven is not a single, undifferentiated place, but a hierarchy of increasingly divine spaces. But here's what's radical. In most ascent texts, the visionary remains fundamentally human. They visit heaven and return. Enoch doesn't return, he stays. And in staying, he changes. The transformation begins subtly in Second Enoch. Enoch is anointed. He is clothed in garments of glory. He is given knowledge of all things, past, present, and future. God reveals to him the secrets of creation, the movements of the stars, the duration of the world. Enoch becomes a cosmic scribe, writing down 360 books of divine wisdom. For 40 days, he dictates to his sons everything he has learned. And then he ascends again, this time permanently, The text says simply, "They took Enoch up to heaven." But what happened after that moment? Second Enoch ends without telling us the final act of the transformation. For that, we need to turn to Third Enoch, a text written centuries later, but claiming to reveal what happened when Enoch finally shed his human nature completely. Was this always part of the story, or did later mystics invent the Metatron mythology to answer questions the earlier text left open? That's the mystery we'll explore next. Third Enoch reveals a transformation so radical that it scandalized many rabbis. Enoch becomes Metatron, the angel who bears the name of God and sits on a throne beside the divine. Third Enoch, also called the Book of Enoch or Sefer Hekalot, takes us into the inner chambers of heaven. The Hekalot, the heavenly palaces where only the most advanced mystics dared to travel in ecstatic vision. The text is framed as a revelation given to Rabbi Ishmael, a 2nd century sage, who ascends to heaven and encounters the angel Metatron. But Metatron has a secret. He was not always an angel. "I am Enoch, son of Jared," Metatron reveals. And then he describes what happened after his final ascent. The Holy One, blessed be he, took Enoch and brought him into the highest heaven. When Enoch arrived, his flesh was transformed into flames. His body became burning torches. His bones became glowing coals. His eyelashes turned into lightning. His eyeballs became fiery torches. His hair became flames. All his limbs became wings of fire. The text says, "The radiance of Enoch's Shekinah, his divine presence, covered the entire 6th heaven." But the physical transformation was only the beginning. God placed a crown upon Enoch's head, inscribed with letters by which heaven and earth were created. God gave him 72 wings and 365,000 eyes, one for each day of the cosmic year. God inscribed upon Enoch's flesh every secret of wisdom, every mystery of Torah, every hidden name of power. And then came the most shocking moment of all. God gave Enoch a throne beside his own. God gave Enoch a name, Metatron, meaning one who sits beside the throne, or possibly the little YHWH. And God commanded all the angels, from the highest seraphim to the lowest ministers, to bow before the transformed Enoch and call him the lesser YHWH. Can you see why this would be theologically explosive? In Jewish tradition, only God receives worship. Only God sits enthroned. The name YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, is so holy it cannot be spoken aloud. And yet, here is a text claiming that a human being ascended, transformed, and received divine prerogatives that should belong to God alone. Some rabbis were horrified. The Babylonian Talmud preserves a story about a heretic named Elisha ben Abuya, who ascended to paradise and saw Metatron sitting down, sitting as if he had the authority to rest in God's presence. Elisha concluded there were two powers in heaven, a heretical belief that challenged Jewish monotheism. The story says that to correct this error, Metatron was given 60 lashes of fire to teach him that he must stand in God's presence like every other angel. The message was clear. Even Metatron cannot be a second God. But the very existence of this story tells us something important. the Metatron tradition was widespread enough and troubling enough that it required official condemnation. People believed it. They wrestled with it, and in mystical circles, the idea of Enoch's transformation into a divine being became a cornerstone of Jewish esotericism. Who exactly is Metatron in the mystical hierarchy? Third Enoch gives him titles and roles that strain the boundaries of monotheism. He is the Prince of the Divine Presence, standing before God's throne. He is the Angel of the Lord, who appeared to Moses in the burning bush. He is the youth, suggesting both his once human origin and his eternal youthfulness in angelic form. He is the scribe who records every deed in the heavenly books. He is the guide who leads souls through the afterlife. He is the intercessor who presents Israel's prayers before God. In Kabbalistic tradition, Metatron becomes even more significant. He is associated with the Sephira of Keter, the crown, the highest emanation of divine light. He is called the Chancellor of Heaven, administering God's will throughout creation. Some texts identify him with the angel of the Lord, who led Israel through the wilderness, of whom God said, "My name is in him." That phrase, "My name is in him," becomes the justification for calling Metatron the lesser YHWH. But here's the question that haunts every reading of Third Enoch. Is this theology or theurgy? Is this describing a cosmological fact about how God structured heaven? Or is it providing a roadmap for human transformation, a mystical technology by which others might follow Enoch's path? The answer seems to be both. For the Merkava mystics, the Jewish mystics of late antiquity, who specialized in visions of the divine chariot throne, Enoch's transformation was not a unique historical event, but a template. These mystics undertook dangerous ascents through the heavenly palaces, reciting incantations, bearing magical seals, confronting terrifying angelic gatekeepers. Their goal was not simply to see heaven, but to participate in it, to transform themselves through theurgical practices until they too might enter the presence of God. The parallel to other ancient traditions is striking. In the Greco-Roman world, the imperial cult promoted the apotheosis of emperors. Julius Caesar, Augustus, Hadrian, and others were declared divine after death, worshipped in temples, depicted with radiant crowns. The hero Heracles ascended Mount Olympus and became a god. Romulus was taken up in a whirlwind and became the god Quirinus. These were not metaphors. For ancient pagans, the boundary between human and divine was permeable, at least for exceptional individuals. Early Christianity inherited and transformed this motif. Jesus is described as ascending to heaven, where he sits at the right hand of God. At the Transfiguration, his appearance changes. His face shines like the sun. His clothes become dazzling white, brilliant as light. The book of Revelation describes Jesus with eyes like flames and a face like the blazing sun. Some early Christian groups, particularly Gnostic Christians, taught that advanced souls could ascend through the heavens, shedding ignorance and materiality until they were reabsorbed into the divine pleroma. The difference is that Christianity generally reserved this transformation for Jesus alone, the unique God-man. Enochic mysticism, by contrast, suggested that what happened to Enoch was not unique. It was simply the most complete example of something humans could achieve. Or could they? That brings us to the great debate. Scholars fiercely debate whether Second and Third Enoch preserve authentic ancient traditions or represent later mystical inventions. And the answer reshapes how we understand the boundaries of Jewish thought. Let's start with what we know for certain. Second Enoch, also called Slavonic Enoch, or the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, survives only in Old Church Slavonic manuscripts. No Hebrew or Aramaic original has been found. The earliest manuscript dates to the 14th century, but the text itself is much older. Most scholars place its composition somewhere between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE, making it roughly contemporary with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the earliest Christian writings. The evidence for this early date includes the text's references to temple practices that ended with the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, its solar calendar similar to the one used at Qumran, and its theological concerns that match those of Second Temple Judaism. However, some scholars argue for a later date, suggesting the text might be a Christian composition or a Jewish text heavily edited by Christian scribes. The debate remains unsettled. Third Enoch is easier to date, but no less controversial. It is written in Hebrew and clearly belongs to the Merkava mysticism of late antiquity, probably composed between the 5th and 6th centuries CE. This makes it significantly later than Second Enoch, which raises an obvious question. If Third Enoch's Metatron mythology is from the 5th century, can it really represent an authentic continuation of earlier Enochic tradition, or is it a new invention? Here's where it gets interesting. References to Metatron appear earlier than Third Enoch itself. The Babylonian Talmud, compiled between the 3rd and 6th centuries, mentions Metatron multiple times, always with a sense of unease. The name appears in magical texts and amulets. Metatron shows up in translations of the Bible into Aramaic, the Targums, where he is sometimes identified with the angel of the Lord. This suggests that the Metatron tradition was already circulating in Jewish communities before Third Enoch was written down. Moreover, the idea of Enoch's transformation has earlier roots. First Enoch, which definitely dates to the Second Temple period, describes Enoch as a visionary who travels through the cosmos and is given cosmic secrets. The Book of Jubilees, also from the Second Temple era, says Enoch was taken from amongst the children of men, and we conducted him into the Garden of Eden in majesty and honor. And behold, there he writes down the condemnation and judgment of the world. The Genesis Apocryphon from Qumran describes Enoch in exalted terms. The thread of Enoch, as a transcendent figure, runs deep in Jewish literature. So what changed? The escalation from Enoch ascends to paradise, to Enoch becomes Metatron, the lesser YHWH, and sits on a throne beside God, represents a theological leap that many scholars find suspicious. Did Jews of the Second Temple period really believe a human could become an angel with divine attributes? Or is this a later development influenced by Christian doctrines of Jesus' exaltation? This is where scholarly battle lines are drawn. One camp, represented by scholars like James Davila and Andrei Orlov, argues that the Metatron tradition reflects genuinely ancient Jewish ideas about the exaltation of righteous humans, ideas that existed alongside and in tension with strict monotheism. They point to the Son of Man figure in Daniel 7, who is given authority and glory and comes on the clouds of heaven, a human-like figure exalted to divine status. They note the exegogue of Ezekiel the tragedian, where Moses has a vision of sitting on God's throne and receiving a crown. They reference the two powers heresy, which the rabbis felt compelled to condemn, suggesting the idea was widespread enough to be dangerous. The opposing camp, including scholars like Peter Schaeffer, argues that the full-blown Metatron mythology is a later development, possibly influenced by Christian angelology, and certainly reflecting the theurgical interests of late antique mystics. They note that the most explicit claims about Metatron's divine status appear in texts we can definitely date to the medieval period. They suggest that Merkava mysticism borrowed from and reacted against Christian claims about Jesus, creating a Jewish angelic figure who could rival Christ without compromising monotheism. Both sides have compelling arguments, which means the truth probably lies somewhere in between. The pattern of a righteous figure ascending and being glorified is genuinely ancient. The specific theology of Metatron, as the lesser YHWH, is likely later, but the continuity between them suggests evolution rather than invention from whole cloth. What makes this debate more than academic is what it reveals about the permeability of religious boundaries in antiquity. Judaism, Christianity, Gnosticism, Hermeticism. These traditions were not sealed boxes but overlapping circles, borrowing ideas, competing with each other, influencing one another's development. The Enochic tradition sits at the intersection of these circles. Consider the parallels. In Gnostic Christianity, the Savior figure descends from the highest heaven, assumes mortal form, and then ascends again, teaching others the secret knowledge that allows them to escape materiality and return to the divine realm. In Hermetic literature, Hermes Trismegistus ascends through the planetary spheres, and the initiated reader is invited to follow. In Neoplatonism, the soul's journey is from the One, through progressive emanations, into matter, and then, through philosophical contemplation, back up to unity with the divine. In each case, the structure is the same: descent, incarnation, revelation, ascent, and transformation. The Enochic texts participate in this broader ancient conversation about how the divine and human intersect. They offer a Jewish answer to a question that obsessed the ancient world. Can we transcend our mortal limits? But here's another question, one that might be even more important. Why did humans want to transcend themselves in the first place? What is it about being human that felt insufficient? Across cultures and centuries, humans have imagined ascending beyond themselves. But the Enochic tradition offers something uniquely radical, a transformation that is physical, ontological, and complete. The ancient world was filled with stories of mortals who brushed against divinity. In Greek mythology, Ganymede was taken to Olympus to serve as Zeus's cupbearer, immortal, but still fundamentally human. Psyche endured trials and was finally given ambrosia, becoming a goddess and marrying Eros. Aristeus, son of Apollo, was granted immortality after perfecting the arts of beekeeping and cheesemaking. In Roman tradition, Aeneas descended to the underworld, learned his destiny, and though he remained mortal, his descendants would found an eternal empire. But these transformations were gifts from the gods, not achievements of the mortals themselves. Enoch is different. Yes, God commands his transformation, but Enoch earned it through righteousness. The text emphasizes that Enoch walked with God, a phrase that suggests intimate relationship and moral perfection. His transformation is presented not as arbitrary divine favoritism, but as the natural culmination of a holy life. This makes the Enochic tradition more akin to the mystery religions than to mythology. In the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates underwent a secret ritual that promised transformation, not in the distant afterlife, but in this life. They entered the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, and emerged changed, having witnessed visions that assured them of blessed immortality. The exact details were kept secret on pain of death, but ancient authors hint at revelations involving Persephone's descent and return, symbolic death and rebirth, and mystical union with the divine. In the Orphic mysteries, the goal was even more explicit: to purify the divine soul trapped in the mortal body, to remember one's true divine origin, and at death to escape the cycle of reincarnation and join the gods. Gold tablets buried with Orphic initiates give them passwords to speak in the underworld. I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. The parallel to Enoch is striking. He ascends through the heavens, sheds his earthly body, and emerges as a being of fire and light, no longer fully human, no longer bound by mortal limits. The difference is that in the mystery religions, this transformation was symbolic and internal, a change of consciousness and spiritual status. Enoch's transformation is literal and external, a metamorphosis of substance. Or is it, here's where different readers, ancient and modern, diverge dramatically. For ancient literalists, including many Merkava mystics, Enoch's transformation was real. It happened. A man became an angel. This was not allegory, but history and cosmology. God had the power to transform human substance into angelic substance, flesh into fire, mortality into something eternal. If God could do it for Enoch, perhaps, with the right knowledge, the right practices, the right spiritual purity, God might do it for others. This reading fueled practical mysticism. The Hekala texts describe techniques for ascending through the heavenly palaces, specific prayers, divine names to recite, seals to visualize, dangers to avoid. The mystic stands, fasts, places his head between his knees, whispers the names of power, and begins to rise. He encounters angelic guards who challenge him. If he knows the passwords, divine names, secret formulas, they let him pass. If not, they cast him down. The journey is perilous. The texts warn that many who attempt it are destroyed, consumed by the fire of the divine presence they're not ready to withstand. But for others, including many modern interpreters, Enoch's transformation is psychological and spiritual, not literal. Carl Jung would recognize in Metatron an archetype of the self, the integrated totality of consciousness that transcends the ego. The ascent through the heavens becomes the journey of individuation, passing through increasingly refined levels of consciousness. The transformation of flesh into fire represents the integration of primitive instincts and material attachments into spiritual energy. Metatron's throne beside God represents the ego's proper relationship to the self, not identical with it, which would be inflation, psychosis, but in dialogue with it, serving it, reflecting it. From this perspective, Third Enoch becomes a map of the psyche. The seven heavens are seven stages of consciousness. The angelic gatekeepers are complexes and defenses that must be negotiated. The transformation into fire is the alchemical dissolution of the old personality structure and its reconstitution at a higher level of integration. This reading is not purely modern. Medieval Kabbalists understood the Enochic transformation as both literal and symbolic simultaneously. Enoch literally ascended and transformed, yes, but his story also encoded secrets about how every human soul could ascend through the Sephirot, the emanations of divine light, climbing the tree of life from Malkuth, the material world, to Keter, the crown, pure divine consciousness. The Kabbalistic practice of visualization, meditation, and ethical refinement aimed at precisely this ascent. In Lurianic Kabbalah, developed by Isaac Luria in the 16th century, the entire cosmos is understood as being in a process of transformation. Adam's fall scattered divine sparks into matter. The purpose of human existence is to gather these sparks, to elevate the material back toward the divine, and ultimately to repair the broken vessels of creation. In this framework, Enoch's transformation becomes a template for the cosmic work every soul must undertake. The Christian mystical tradition developed parallel ideas. Maximus the Confessor taught theosis, the doctrine that humans are called to become divine, to participate in God's nature through grace. Athanasius famously wrote, "God became human so that humans might become God." This is not pantheism, or the dissolution of the human into the divine, but rather the perfection of humanity through union with God, the transformation of mortal nature into immortal life. The difference is subtle but crucial. In most Christian theology, this transformation happens through Christ and in the age to come. It is mediated by the incarnation and actualized in resurrection. The Enochic tradition, by contrast, suggests transformation can happen now, in this life, to a mortal who achieves sufficient righteousness or mystical attainment. Which brings us full circle to the question of whether Enoch's story is dangerous. If transformation into an angelic state is possible, who gets to attempt it? What are the qualifications? What are the risks? The texts themselves suggest the danger. Third Enoch describes mystics who ascended and were destroyed, consumed by fire or driven mad. The Talmud warns against entering the Pardes, the orchard, a metaphor for mystical speculation, unprepared. 4 rabbis entered paradise, the story goes. 1 died, 1 went mad, 1 became a heretic. Only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. The message is clear: transformation is possible but perilous. The boundary between human and divine exists for a reason. To cross it requires not just knowledge, but purity. Not just technique, but righteousness. Not just aspiration, but divine permission. And yet the texts preserve the possibility. They keep the door open. They whisper that what Enoch did, you might do too. The ancient dream of transformation has not died. It has migrated into new forms, from psychological self-actualization to technological transhumanism, each grappling with the same question: can we become more than human? If you'd told the ancient Merkava mystics that humans in the 21st century would be discussing how to upload consciousness into computers, merge with artificial intelligence, genetically engineer our descendants, or extend life indefinitely through biological manipulation, they might have recognized the dream immediately. The details differ, but the core impulse is identical. Transcend the limits of mortal flesh and become something greater. Transhumanism, the intellectual and cultural movement advocating for the transformation of the human condition through technology, is essentially Enochic mysticism translated into secular scientific language. The transhumanist doesn't speak of ascending through 7 heavens, but of progressing through technological stages: biological humanity, augmented humanity, post-humanity. They don't invoke divine names, but genetic code, neural interfaces, quantum computing. They don't seek transformation into an angel, but into something they call posthuman, a being as far beyond current humanity as we are beyond our evolutionary ancestors. The parallel is not accidental. Both traditions arise from a deep discomfort with human limits: aging, death, ignorance, weakness, suffering. Both promise that these limits are not final, but provisional, that with the right knowledge and practices, we can transcend them. Both imagine transformation as a kind of ascent, a progressive refinement that leaves behind crude materiality in favor of something luminous, powerful, and enduring. But there's a crucial difference. The Enochic tradition embedded transformation within a moral and theological framework. Enoch transforms because he walked with God. His ascent requires righteousness. The mystics who followed his path undertook rigorous ethical and spiritual preparation. Transformation was not a technological problem, but a moral and spiritual achievement. Transhumanism, by contrast, largely brackets moral questions in favor of technical ones. The question is not, should we transcend human nature? But how do we transcend human nature? This shift from the ethical to the technical reflects a broader modern shift from viewing human nature as something sacred and given to viewing it as something malleable and improvable. Yet even within transhumanism, ancient patterns reemerge. Nick Bostrom, one of transhumanism's leading philosophers, speaks of existential risks that could prevent humanity from reaching its post-human potential. Risks like nuclear war, engineered pandemics, or malicious artificial intelligence. These risks function much like the angelic gatekeepers in Hakalot mysticism, dangers that must be navigated with wisdom and caution. The mystic who ascends unprepared is destroyed. The civilization that develops transformative technology without wisdom destroys itself. The psychological tradition offers another lens. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs culminates in self-actualization, the realization of one's full potential. At the peak of his later work, Maslow added an even higher category: self-transcendence, where the self moves beyond personal concerns to cosmic consciousness, unity with all being, peak experiences of the divine. Carl Jung's process of individuation aims at the realization of the self, the integration of consciousness and unconsciousness into a greater wholeness symbolized by the divine child, the wise old man, the mandala, archetypal images of completeness and transcendence. From this perspective, Enoch's transformation into Metatron is an image of successful individuation. The ego, Enoch, has done the difficult work of moral development, walked with God. It then undergoes a perilous journey through the unconscious, ascent through the heavens, encounter with angelic powers. Finally, it achieves integration with the self, transformation into Metatron, enthronement beside God. The person who completes this process is not the same person who began it. They have become, in some real sense, more than they were. What's fascinating is how these modern psychological readings preserve the ancient insight that transformation is not self-generated but received. In Jung's system, the ego does not create the self. It discovers and aligns with it. Self-realization requires surrender as much as effort. Similarly, in the Enochic tradition, Enoch's transformation is both earned and given. He walks with God, effort. But God commands his ascent and performs the transformation, grace. This paradox, transformation as both achievement and gift, appears across mystical traditions. The Zen practitioner sits in meditation for years, but enlightenment, when it comes, arrives suddenly and unbidden. The Christian mystic practices prayer and contemplation, but union with God is experienced as grace, not accomplishment. The Sufi traveler journeys through stages of spiritual development, but annihilation in God, fana, is God's work, not the mystic's. The question modern secular culture struggles with is this: if transformation is purely technological, purely an achievement of human will and ingenuity, what happens to the dimension of receptivity, grace, surrender? Can we engineer our way to transcendence? Or does transcendence by definition require opening ourselves to something beyond our control? The Enochic tradition suggests an answer. Transformation requires both human effort and divine action. Enoch had to walk with God for 365 years before God took him. The mystic must prepare, purify, learn the divine names. But the actual ascent, the moment of transformation, comes when God opens the heavens. You cannot force your way into divinity. You can only make yourself ready and wait. This tension between effort and grace, between technique and gift, between self-transformation and divine transformation, remains unresolved in modern thought. Transhumanism largely ignores it. Psychology acknowledges it, but struggles to integrate it with scientific materialism. The ancient texts, by contrast, place it at the center of their vision. Perhaps this is why the Enochic texts continue to fascinate. They remind us that the dream of transcendence is ancient and may be ineradicable from human consciousness. But they also warn us that transformation is not neutral. It can elevate or destroy. It requires not just power, but wisdom, not just knowledge, but righteousness, not just ambition, but humility before something greater than ourselves. In an age where we're on the cusp of technologies that could radically alter human nature, where gene editing, artificial intelligence, and cybernetic enhancement promise to make our descendants as different from us as we are from our pre-human ancestors. The Enochic tradition offers both encouragement and warning. Yes, transcendence is possible, but the path is narrow, and many who attempt it are lost. Returning to the texts themselves, we find not just mythology or mysticism, but an enduring vision of what human life might become. A vision that continues to haunt and inspire. Let's come back to where we started. Enoch standing before the throne of God, his flesh beginning to burn. What actually happens in that moment? The text of Third Enoch describes it with breathtaking specificity. Each part of Enoch's body transforms individually. His flesh becomes fire, his sinews become flame, his bones become coals. His features, eyebrows, eyelids, even individual eyelashes turn into lightning. The transformation is total and particular, not a vague apotheosis, but a detailed metamorphosis. This specificity matters. It suggests the text is trying to communicate something real about transformation, even if we read it symbolically. Change is not wholesale, but particular. Each aspect of the old self must be addressed, confronted, and transmuted. The transformation is painful. Flesh to fire is not a gentle process. It requires the complete dissolution of what you were in order to become what you might be. Across cultures, transformative fire appears as a central metaphor. In Zoroastrianism, souls must pass through molten metal at the final judgment, which feels like warm milk to the righteous, but torment to the wicked. In Christian tradition, Pentecost brings tongues of fire resting on the apostles, transforming frightened disciples into bold preachers. In alchemy, the prima materia must be burned, dissolved, purified, and reconstituted through repeated firings before the philosopher's stone emerges. In Hindu tradition, the Kundalini rises like fire through the chakras, burning away impurities until consciousness achieves union with the divine. Fire transforms by destroying. It does not preserve the original substance, but breaks molecular bonds, releases energy, leaves behind ash, or transmutes matter into new forms. To be transformed by fire is to accept annihilation of the old self as the price of becoming the new self. This is what makes Enoch's story so psychologically powerful, even if we don't believe it literally. We all face moments when the old self must die for a new self to emerge. The loss of innocence, the end of a relationship, the collapse of a career, the confrontation with mortality, the dark night of the soul. These are fires that consume who we thought we were, and what emerges afterward is changed, scarred, but potentially wiser and more integrated. The Enochic tradition makes explicit what these experiences reveal. Transformation is not addition, but substitution. You don't become Metatron by adding angelic attributes to your human nature. You become Metatron by ceasing to be Enoch. The name changes, the substance changes. The old is gone, the new has come. And yet, and this is crucial, continuity remains. Metatron remembers being Enoch. In Third Enoch, he tells Rabbi Ishmael his story. I am Enoch, son of Jared. The transformation does not erase identity, but elevates it. The human past is not forgotten, but transfigured. This too resonates with lived experience. People who undergo profound transformation, whether through religious conversion, psychological breakthrough, or simply the accumulated wisdom of years, often feel they're simultaneously the same person and a different person. I'm still me, but everything has changed. The paradox of continuity through discontinuity, of remaining oneself while becoming other than oneself, is one of the deep mysteries of conscious existence. The Enochic texts encode this mystery in narrative form. They give us a story that makes sense of the nonsensical, that you can change completely and still be you. But let's address the elephant in the room. Should we take any of this literally? Did Enoch really transform into an angel? For ancient believers, the answer was often yes. For modern historical critical scholars, the answer is no. These are myths, legends, theological speculation crystallized into narrative. But perhaps there's a third option. These texts are neither pure history nor pure fiction, but rather maps of possibility, diagrams of what human consciousness can potentially achieve or become. Indigenous cultures worldwide have shamanic traditions where practitioners journey to other worlds, transform into animals or spirits, and return with knowledge and power. Anthropologists don't ask whether these journeys really happened in a literal sense. They're interested in what the journeys mean, what they accomplish psychologically and socially, how they shape the shaman's consciousness and community role. The shamanic journey is real in its effects, regardless of its ontological status. Similarly, we might read the Enochic transformation as real in its psychological and spiritual effects, regardless of whether it describes a cosmological fact. The mystic who meditates on Enoch's ascent, who visualizes the transformation from flesh to fire, who imaginatively participates in the enthronement beside God, undergoes a real transformation of consciousness. They are changed by the practice, even if they never literally leave their body or travel to a heaven above the stars. This is not to reduce the texts to mere metaphor. Metaphors are powerful. They shape how we understand reality, possibility, and ourselves. To say Enoch became Metatron is to assert that human transformation is possible, that our current state is not final, that transcendence is within reach. That assertion changes how we live, and that, ultimately, may be the point. Whether or not a man named Enoch really transformed into an angel named Metatron 3 millennia ago, the story of his transformation continues to transform those who encounter it. It whispers that we are not stuck, not finished, not defined forever by our current limitations. It suggests that hidden within the human is something divine, waiting to emerge if we can find the courage to burn away everything that obscures it. The texts preserve this possibility even as they warn of its dangers. They keep open a door, that much of later religious orthodoxy tried to close. They remind us that once upon a time, humans dared to imagine not just worshiping the divine, but joining it, not just serving God, but sitting beside God, not just aspiring to goodness, but transforming into something radiant, terrible, and new. So where does this leave us? Here at the end of our journey through the heavens with Enoch. We've traced his ascent from mortal man to angelic prince. We've examined the texts that preserve his story. Second Enoch, with its vision of the seven heavens. Third Enoch, with its radical theology of transformation. We've explored the scholarly debates about whether these texts preserve ancient traditions or represent later mystical innovations. We've compared the Enochic vision of transcendence to parallel traditions in the ancient world and to modern movements from psychology to transhumanism. We've wrestled with what transformation might mean, whether literal or symbolic, historical or archetypal, cosmological or psychological. But the mystery remains. Can humans really transcend their nature? Is there something divine latent within us, waiting to be awakened? Or is transcendence a beautiful illusion, a dream we project onto the cosmos to make our mortality bearable? The Enochic texts don't give us a simple answer. They give us a vision, a possibility, a map of ascent. They say, this happened once, it might happen again. The heavens are not closed. The throne beside God is not empty. Transformation is real. Whether we believe that literally, symbolically, or psychologically, the texts invite us into a larger vision of human possibility. They challenge the assumption that we are fixed, finished, imprisoned in matter and mortality with no escape. They suggest that consciousness can expand, that the self can transform, that boundaries we take for granted might be more permeable than we think. In our current moment, when technology promises to make our wildest dreams of transcendence technically possible, when genetic engineering and artificial intelligence hover on the horizon, with the power to remake human nature, the Enochic tradition offers both inspiration and caution. Yes, transformation is possible. Yes, humans can become more than they are. But transformation is not neutral, and power is not wisdom. The path is narrow. The fire is real. Many who reach for divinity are consumed. The texts preserve a vision that is both hopeful and humbling, both liberating and terrifying. They tell us we are made for more than this. They also warn us that more might destroy us if we grasp for it without preparation, without righteousness, without understanding that transformation requires not just power, but surrender, not just technique, but grace. Perhaps that's why Enoch continues to fascinate us across millennia. In his story, we see our own deepest hope, that we are not trapped, that change is possible, that the trajectory of consciousness is not downward into dust, but upward into light. We also see our deepest fear, that the transformation we desire might cost us everything we are, that becoming more than human might mean ceasing to be human at all, that the fire that transforms and the fire that consumes might be the same fire. Enoch walked with God for 365 years, 1 year for each day of the cosmic cycle, until he completed himself and was taken up. His transformation was both sudden and earned, both gift and achievement. both an end and a beginning. He became Metatron, the angel who bears the name of God, the youth who is older than time, the scribe who records all deeds, the prince who sits beside the throne. And in becoming Metatron, Enoch became a sign for all who come after, a sign of possibility and a sign of warning, a map and a mystery, a story that says transformation is real, and a question that asks whether you're willing to burn. The heavens remain open. The throne beside God remains. The path that Enoch walked still winds upward through realms of light and terror. Whether anyone will follow, whether anyone can follow, whether anyone should follow. These questions echo through centuries of mystical speculation, theological debate, and human longing. The texts don't answer these questions definitively. They simply preserve the vision. A man becomes an angel. Mortality touches immortality. The human ascends into the divine. They keep alive the possibility that we are more than we seem, that transformation is real, that the boundary between human and divine is not a wall, but a veil, thin enough to pass through if we dare, if we're pure enough, if we're called. That vision of Enoch transformed, of Metatron enthroned, of the human become divine, continues to burn in the human imagination like a fire that cannot be extinguished. It burns in the mystic seeking union with God. It burns in the psychologist mapping the journey of the self. It burns in the transhumanist engineering posthuman possibility. It burns in anyone who has ever felt that mortal life is not enough, that we are made for something more, that somewhere beyond the visible heavens, a transformation awaits. Whether that transformation is real or imagined, cosmic or psychological, possible or impossible, the Enochic tradition holds out the vision and asks, will you ascend? Can you endure the fire? Are you ready to become something other than what you are? The question remains open. The heavens wait. The fire burns on.